Recon Gunner here, and we're going to talk about the death of meaning. This little overview of this blog post that I wrote was so far has been the most controversial, most popular blog post I've put on my channel. It's gotten well over 8,000 views, hundreds and hundreds of comments, and sparked a lot of conversation internally in the TTRPG community, gaming community in general. And so I thought it would be fun to go through this a little bit and add a little color to it. And here we go. The power of myth, why stories matter. Fantasy and sci-fi are mythic mirrors that cloak truth and legend and teach us who we are. They're like, myth is like, hey, this is humanity. This is what's possible. This is what's inside of us. And these metaphors and sometimes legends and sometimes actual events are retold to us so that we can understand who we are as human beings in general, right? The Lord of the Rings wrestles with mortality and power and the risks of both. And it's a very, very telling story. That movie series still resonates with so many people today because of how powerful it is. And Tolkien himself even said that it had to deal with death, immortality, and understanding that not only the death of an individual self, but the death of a culture and a death of an idea, and it can be overrun. It's very, very powerful. Star Trek uses space to discuss race, war, and human nature, and I'm referring specifically to the original series as well as Next Generation to some extent. But in the original series, there was a lot of turmoil during the civil rights movement in the 60s, and Star Trek comes on TV, and Star Trek actually has the first interracial kiss on television, right? It's Kirk and Uhura have a kiss on television, a white guy and a black woman, and it's like nobody cares, right? And nobody cares. It's a thing because it's Star Trek. It's in the future, and they actually have a lot of episodes that are about those types of things, race and war and human nature. One of my favorite things, one of my favorite episodes about war in Star Trek the original series, is they go to this planet and there's a simulated war happening, and every time there's like a simulated attack, your number gets called and you have to go into a disintegration tube, and then this society fights the other society, and the same thing happens. And at one point, they blow up the Enterprise, and they're ordered to beam down all of their crew to be disintegrated because it has been obliterated in this war that's not happening. And Kirk's like, "What? We're not having that. You guys have been fighting this war for 1,000 years because it's clean. It's been sterilized. It's evil. There's no reason to end it because you're not dealing with the horrors of it. People go into a disintegration cube and there's no mess, there's no fuss, there's no nothing. It's just disgusting." And so I think he orders an attack somewhere and actually blows something up and like maybe even kills some people. I don't know what happens. And he's like, he destroys the machine, the computer that's like running this simulation, right? And he goes, "Now you know what war really is, and maybe you'll then have the courage to end it," right? It's huge. It's powerful. Star Trek is like that. The Zone, Twilight Zone, especially the original stuff, none of the new stuff, whatever. Let's go back to the original stuff. And in those stories, especially, what is it? The monsters on Maple Street. That whole story about the power goes out and people start getting paranoid and they're accusing each other, and then somebody's car turns on by itself and they're getting manipulated by like propaganda, and they're trying to, these are all neighbors, they're all friends, they all know one another, they've been living together, right? And the next thing you know, they're built up into this frenzy and they're this crazy mob, and some guy that they sent off to check another neighborhood to see if their power went out is returning back, and as he's returning back, they freak out and they murder this guy, right? And it turns out it's aliens, and they're manipulating him, and they're showing how easily we are to be manipulated. Don't you feel that way on social media? Don't you feel that way on the news? Don't you feel that way in popular culture? And they start manipulating, and the next thing you know, people are like, hey, we have to go after our neighbor. It's very interesting in those stories. Science fiction warns us of the futures we might avoid. Science fiction, says, hey, this is a possibility. Here's this new thing. Here's this idea. The idea of robots and artificial intelligence has been explored in science fiction for at least 70 years, probably, if not longer. We have been kind of equipped with these stories to understand what it is. Asimov's three laws of robotics, or whatever it is, and all of these things have been dealt with, right? 2001: A Space Odyssey. You've got HAL 9000, and one of the things that they say is like he was lied to, and that's why he went crazy. You could see it that way. I think you could see it that way, where HAL was lied to, and he was given false information, and then when he processed that false information, it scared him, and maybe that's how he evolved. Maybe whatever, but that's kind of an interesting thing. Ray Bradbury has a bunch of stories like Fahrenheit 451 with the TVs, and that's something that people overlook in that. They're burning books. Yeah, that's one of them, but but they have these TVs, these programs, and you can buy a wall, and at some point you can get 4 walls, and then the writers write you into the sitcom, and they give you lines, and so like you're actually in the sitcom, which is kind of interesting. But most people have these, like, they have their earbuds in, and they're not thinking about anything. They're just worried about their shows. I mean, you've seen that. You've seen that. How many times have you gone to work and seen that? It's pretty interesting. But good stories like that teach us about courage. They teach us about justice. They teach us about discipline, and they show us the real cost of evil. And if you're someone out there who doesn't believe that evil is real, then I think you need to check yourself. Evil is real. It's a real thing, and it's around us every day. And those are the things that dealing with evil as evil requires courage and discipline and justice, and to step outside of it and be a warrior. The plague of absurdism. Oh man, absurdism. Absurdism is and nihilism specifically. Nihilistic absurdism claims nothing matters. It draining meaning from stories and games. So it doesn't matter, whatever it is. The next thing you know, we had a game when we were in high school a long time ago. One of our guys wanted to run a game, and he didn't know what to do. And we were having fun with it, whatever. And we gave him an opportunity. And at some point, we're fighting a giant cheeseburger. And you're like, at some point when you're fighting a giant cheeseburger in D&D, what? Like, yeah, I get it. Like, maybe we had some fun. We giggled a little bit about it. But what? Did that guy ever run a game again? No, nobody ever wanted to play a game with him again because it didn't make any sense. It was absurd. It was nonsensical, right? It was, and there's a time and a place for nonsense, and there's a time and a place to relax and just have fun. And that was a lot of the comments that I got on this post was, it's just a game, man. Like, we can have fun, relax. Yeah, it's just a game, but you're spending your life on it, right? How much time have you invested into your games? I've invested years into games. I'm a game designer. I'm building a world, building a game. You're putting time into this. What do you get out of it besides some kind of just social interaction, right? And that can have value. Can hanging out with your friends definitely has value, and it has meaning, and it's important. I don't doubt that. Playing games with your kids and your family, that's, if that's the point of it, great. But it can be more. And I think games ideally should be more. And when you claim that it doesn't matter and it's just an absurd thing, right? D&D, for instance, is basically had been turned into a theme park ride. That's what it is. And by them reviving the cartoon, they keep referencing, I keep seeing that they keep reviving the cartoon, and they actually brought the elements from the 80s cartoon into the new version of the game. Brought those characters back, Tiamat and all of those guys. I can't even remember. And Uni, I think they skipped Uni for some reason. That's part of the absurdism one. Part of that is to go after my generation and get us back into it and kind of get some nostalgia. But that cartoon starts off as a theme park ride. They're on a roller coaster and they're going into the Dungeons and Dragons ride. And, and they get sucked into this world where all these terrible things happen. That show had some consequences. There's a diabolical episode in that show where they make one of the characters old. They turn her into an old lady, and then they turn, I think his name's Bobby, the barbarian guy, into like a little baby, right? And they're just tormenting these characters. Like, it's hardcore. I saw a clip of that again, and it's hard to watch. So even then they ramped it up, and there was something that had some value to it, right? But anyways, villains become sympathetic. Heroes are unworthy, and nothing truly matters, so players feel nothing. And you can argue with me all day long, but the heroes unworthy part is ridiculous. We've played with the anti-hero now since at least 1984, 1985 as the primary protagonist in stories. And, that all goes back to Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns. That goes back to The Watchmen, where the heroes themselves are scumbags, right? And the heroes themselves are doing these terrible things so that they can, deal with the problems as it is. And that's specifically that nihilistic kind of absurdism that was brought into that culture. I went through that. I lived through that stuff. And, we love those books. Those stories are interesting because we had never seen it before. But it kept going. There's nowhere to go but down. How much more vile can you get, right? And everybody's trying to outdo the vileness of it. And I think Deadpool is exactly that. Deadpool is absurdism and nihilism. And the only reason why Deadpool can get away with it is because he can't die. He can be nihilistic and absurd because he is immortal. And that his viewpoint on life and how things work does not apply to you as a person because you are not immortal. It's funny sometimes, but there's nothing to learn from that. He's going to do and say these outrageous things because he cannot be hurt or killed. So, okay. So where are the stakes in that? Where are the stakes in those stories when the character themselves can't be killed? It's interesting, and they did that with Superman and some of those other characters that are super high powered. They had to find a way to kill them so that there was some stakes again. I think they saw that, and they needed to sell some more books. The sympathetic villain, I get that villains can be sympathetic because the idea in Hollywood was that your villain thought they were doing the right thing, right? And Thanos is a perfect example of that from, if we want to take a modern reference, he believed that the universe had to be balanced. He believed that the only way to do it was to kill half of the population. I mean, that's a real idea that people are playing with in our society today. There are people that really think that we're overpopulated and the only way to fix it is if we have a lot less people. Okay, who? And then he decides arbitrarily who, right? And he spends his whole time, he sacrifices his own daughter, right, to this cause. He tortures his other daughter to this cause. He sacrifices everything around him so that he can kill half the universe so that the universe can thrive then? That's his whole play, right? And then you see when they come back, there's nothing for the heroes to do, right? Because half the population is gone. And now they have too much of stuff. And the Black Widow is sitting behind a desk hoping for a crisis, and there isn't one. Other than, there might be something. It's just an earthquake. Like, there's nothing we can do. Blah, blah, blah. That's the world you want to live in? It's interesting. Very interesting. Um, the sympathetic villain. Yeah, 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 yeah. Some people are just evil and do things um, because of that. And I think you can just look out the window and see that. Um, sarcasm and irony are used to avoid confronting truth, and sincerity is lost, leaving boredom. Yes. You can look at the comments probably that we'll get on this post, and then also the comments from the post, the blog post that I made that has a more detailed version of this, and you can see the sarcasm and the irony and the lack of actual dialogue or even exploring these ideas, and that kind of thing that's kind of pushed off, right? And there's some kind of, somebody says a cliche, and that cliche happens, and then that's how they live their life. It's a danger. It's a danger. And then you're into boredom, and then boredom breeds other things. And so when the game teaches you that death and defeat aren't real, players stop caring and they stop showing up. So those of you that have a hard time getting your people to play your game, you're having a hard time scheduling, you're having a hard time with that kind of stuff. One, it could just be you need more practice, and you need to be able to run a game better, right? And you're new at it. That's good. That's normal, right? And people don't want to come over and play something if they don't feel like they're being engaged, right? But if it's too easy, that could be it too. There's no stakes. There's no reason. What are you getting out of it? What am I getting out of spending 4 or 5 hours sitting around a table with a bunch of people that you may not even know? And what are you getting out of that beside the social interaction, right? And some of it is so surface level social interaction that it's not even worth talking about when you're sitting around the table and you're talking about, just pop culture stuff and more game stuff and what happened in the latest comic book or movie stuff. That can be fun for a while, but like, is there something else that you could be talking about? Is there something else that you could be exploring? How are you getting better at the end of your game sessions as a person? So the game's worth risk. This is the biggest thing. Players, for me, and this happens now, and it has happened virtually every time I've run a campaign of any sort in almost any game. I get bombarded with messages. When are we playing? When's the next session? This is what my character's doing. Like, to a certain point, at one point, I was getting so bombarded that it was like a full-time job. Matter of fact, it was probably worse than a full-time job. And we would do that, especially in the early days that we were playing. That's how it was all the time. They were begging to play, and I was in the same situation. I played in games the same way. We would hunt during high school. We'd hunt our DM down and tell him what we were doing between classes, and then he'd go into his class and he'd roll some stuff, and he'd come back and tell us what happened. Like, we gamed all day long. It drove him crazy. He's great. But it's because those games had meaning. There was some kind of interest to it. There was something there that helped us. And I do believe it helped me. I do believe games helped me tremendously, personally and professionally. And so people don't make time for meaningless things. They show up when the real stakes matter, right? That's the biggest thing. Like, they'll come and they'll try it out. And that's why I hate, like, the Renaissance Fair. The Renaissance Fair has just turned into this thing where it's not celebrating the Renaissance anymore. It is some kind of weird half-assed fantasy world, where there's fairies and there's dragons and there's all of this other stuff that would not even probably be tolerated in a Renaissance culture. And it's just absurd. It's pointless and it's expensive. What's the point of going? Yeah, you go see a good joust every now and again. They do a good joust. That's probably worth it, but only for that, right? At least there's some men who had to train and had to learn and had to, like, build themselves up to actually do that as an act. That's kind of cool. But realistically, the rest of it is nonsense. Dressing up like a fantasy character at the Renaissance Festival it just sells tickets, I guess. And that kind of, like, piles into the D&D culture, right? Makes every character a god. Every fight is balanced. I've been building stuff in D&D Beyond, and it's like, oh, this one's you got to balance this out. It's too dangerous for this group of characters. Um, what? Like what? Every villain is misunderstood, or you're playing the villains. That's a ridiculous thing too. In Baldur's Gate, you're playing the villain. You're playing these evil characters. You're playing the demon with horns in its head. You're doing deals with the devil. I mean, how many opportunities do you have to sell your soul to a devil in that game? It's just so messed up, so messed up. But a game without danger is a participation trophy disguised as a campaign. It breeds apathy instead of adventure. Men crave adventure. Men crave challenge. Men are looking for something difficult to overcome. And games can be training ground for those things. Earn it or lose it. So fantasy and sci-fi must be about something, right? It must have stakes. It has to be about something. There has to be some truth that your players are going out to find, and bringing that back to your world and rejuvenating your world. That's the hero myth, right? If you remove danger and fear and struggle for meeting, you're left with a hollow shell of a story. Hollow. Yeah, there you go. Hollow shell of a story. I played in a game one night with some people I'd never played with before, and I rolled up this fighter, and we go into this village, and it's being plagued by some kind of witch, they claim, or whatever, and we need to get through the village, and so we make a deal to go figure this out, and so we go down into this valley, and we end up talking to these little fire sprites or whatever, and there's a witch in this tunnel or this cave or whatever it is, and this fire sprite thing gives us these like crowns that we can put on our heads, and everybody in the party just puts the crown on their head, and I'm like, what are you guys doing? What? And I'm like, and they're like, are you coming in? I said, no, I'm staying out here with my crossbow. You guys just walked in. They just walked in. You just put the crown on their head, and they just walked into the cave and talked their way out of this. They didn't even talk their way out of the situation. They just listened. There was no conflict. There was nothing. The worst thing that happened is we almost fell down the ravine because it was a little steep and somebody failed their dex check, but otherwise, like sheep to the slaughter, they just put on these little devices and they walked into the thing. They weren't even worried about it. What kind of game is that? Like, well, it's not even fun. It's like, what is even happening, right? So if there's a consequence-free storytelling becomes the norm, we lose the myths that once made us great. Not only that, real death makes courage necessary. If you go into some of these historical accounts that I've been encountering, going through history and reading about them. I'm listening to the Audie Murphy story right now, To Hell and Back. And Audie Murphy is a decorated World War II veteran who basically single-handedly held off an entire battalion of tanks or whatever during his campaign in Italy, and everybody dies around him the whole time. And every chapter of that book, somebody dies. Horribly. They're blown up and blown into pieces. They're shot in the head. Their bodies are, whatever, and they have to keep going. He has to keep going. He has to keep going. He has to keep going. He's fighting malaria the whole time, right? There is no end to this until the war is over, and that's where the courage comes from. And it's just he was the only one left, I think, is how that scenario goes, right? There's hundreds and thousands of those stories throughout history of men doing those things, and it's mostly men. So if there are no consequences in your storytelling, then there's no purpose, and the myth is, pointless to us. So our job, and kind of my point, is that the writers and the storytellers and the game masters and the players, they must make their worlds matter and give them some weight. You got to have some kind of weight to it. Raise the stakes in your game, right? There should be death at every step. D&D used to be like that. You couldn't walk into a dungeon without checking for traps, every 5 feet, right? And then, that gets a little tedious when you're running a game. But hey, Ravenloft was a great place like that, because every opportunity to lure the players out into the streets, and play off of their good nature, um, brought danger and death, right? And that's what makes courage necessary, and that's where demands are here from heroes, right? To earn their victories. You don't become a hero if you have not overcame something that was so insurmountable that nobody believed it could be done, until you or a group of you have done it, right? Stop rewarding players for nothing. Like, you shouldn't be giving them you shouldn't be leveling people up for just a role-playing session, a bullshit session. There's sessions like that. You just get together and you're just role-playing, and whatever. What are we getting at the end? You're not getting anything. We didn't kill any monsters. There's no experience. You don't get anything. You gotta just dink around in the tavern, and there's no experience there, like in real life, right? If you went to your local tavern and you played bingo on a Tuesday night, what are you really doing? You're not gaining any real experience there. You're just playing bingo and losing a bunch of money. And maybe you have a decent beer, but it's an IPA and it'll just give me a headache anyway. It's a waste of time, right? That's how it should be treated in your game. Waste of time should be, they shouldn't give you anything. And if we don't fight to keep meaning alive, we deserve to lose the legends that must make us great. And some of you will say, well, what legends? What do you mean? The men of history who have shaped our world, especially Western culture, have gone through so much pain and suffering, and surviving through death, and even have died themselves to to inspire others to shape the world. We would not be where we are today without those men. And even if you think of like the mountain men and the explorers of the United States in the early days, especially before the Civil War, where they were just going out into the countryside and they were walking and they were just trekking the rivers, and they were mapping things, and fighting hunger, and fighting natives, fighting for their survival, and the beasts and whatever, that all of that stuff. Kit Carson, right? Doing his thing. He decided to, as a boy, he was like 16, leave on the Santa Fe Trail when the Santa Fe Trail was pretty fresh. It was pretty new, meaning there wasn't really much of a trail. There was kind of a path, and you could be killed along the way, which many people were. You can die of disease and hunger and starvation, all of those things. And as a young boy, made it all the way to Santa Fe. And then when he got to Santa Fe, he wasn't very impressed with the town. It was a dump, is basically what he said. And, I love Santa Fe. I lived there for many years. I graduated from Santa Fe High School. And in some cases, it's still a dump. But before you go after me, I love the town, right? I love the town. But he turns around and he leaves because there's nothing there for him. Turns around and he leaves, and he comes back. And halfway back, he runs into some other people, and they're like, "Oh, you've been to Santa Fe?" He's like, "Yeah." Well, can you take us? And he's like, "Yeah, sure." And so this kid starts walking back and forth to Santa Fe, and that's how he, and then the next thing you know, he's walking back and forth to all these other places, and many times by himself. He's walked from Los Angeles to St. Louis. I don't know how many times, just him and his mule. There's nothing out there. Right? Have you ever just driven from LA to St. Louis? Just drive that. And then imagine walking that by yourself with a mule. Right? Crazy. Just the walking part of it. Right? That just makes him legendary right there. Just walking from LA to St. Louis in 1840 something. Right? Crazy, crazy. Anyways, you can read a little bit more about the blog post as well. I'm Raycon Gunner, out.